Hi guys, it's Christy again, and I thought I would have a bit of fun in this week's video. And I'm going to be painting this old Warhammer Fantasy dwarf berserker figure for you. Of course, this is from Games Workshop originally, though I'm 99% sure that you can't actually buy these from Games Workshop directly anymore. They've been discontinued with the whole Age of Sigmar thing, and they just don't really make dwarfs like this anymore at the moment. But the good news is there's a pretty strong kind of aftermarket for, old style Warhammer figures, so you can probably find him or something very similar through eBay, another auction site, or maybe through a vendor at a wargaming show or bring and buy, something like that. These are still out here and people really still collect them and really kind of want them. So there's a good chance that you can still get one. And you may remember I actually kind of was messing with another dwarf berserker a few months ago when I did my sort of common painting mistakes video. And kind of since then, the whole idea of painting a dwarf berserker has kind of been, I don't know, shaking around in my head, because I kind of did that one, and because of that video, I had to do a lot of kind of bad painting on the figure, which kind of made me feel bad actually. But I have to admit, I started to really get the idea that I really wanted to paint it, actually properly paint a dwarf berserker, because they're just really cool models. I mean, I'm sorry, it's just, they're funny, they're characterful. You've got all this hair and this big exaggerated axe and all this really nice exaggerated detail, and it just from a painting perspective, I just kind of instantly fell in love with it, and just felt kind of sad in that video that I had to kind of do such a bad job on a figure that I actually really liked quite a bit. So of course this is not the same dwarf berserker as that one, but I think he's still really cool, and so I do hope you guys have fun watching this video.
So to start off with, here as usual are all the paints you'll need for this model. I have included skin tones here just because I did paint the skin in the video, but the colors are really not different from what I usually use for skin. There are a couple sort of strange things you should know. One is the glaze medium there. I use Vallejo, but you could get it from other brands, and you'll notice I've got some Army Painter gold in there. I don't normally use Army Painter, but it's a good paint, and my Vallejo gold was really not looking good. It was kind of getting thick or clotted or messed up or something. So I just went with the Army Painter instead, and it worked just fine. I'm going to start out here by painting the dwarf's skin, and I'm going to be using my usual skin base coat, which is Vallejo brown sand. Actually, I do use cork brown sometimes, but they're very, very similar shades, and I find for this application at least virtually interchangeable if you only have one or the other available. And then next I'm going to go ahead and apply a really nice heavy wash of Reichland Flesh Shade, really get that down in all of the sculpted recesses, and it's nice because on this model there's a whole bunch of those. Now my first highlight here is going to be a mixture of the brown sand with a bit of Iraqi sand in it to lighten it up. I'm trying to keep the paint thin and fairly transparent here, but today, at least for me, painting's been a bit of a challenge because it's quite warm out, and when it's quite warm out, the paint tends to not only dry faster, but it also thickens faster, so keeping nice, thin, runny paint on your palette is harder. This may be one of those times when a wet palette would really be a good idea. But anyway, I made it work anyway, so I'm just applying this first layer, and first kind of in a sort of a thin, kind of uneven layer, and then I'm building it up a little bit more to get sort of more saturation and already start working out where those higher highlights are going to be just by applying thicker layers of the color to those locations. And next I'm going to be using Vallejo Black Red to define the really, really deep shadows on the skin. Actually, with this model, there's surprisingly few of those. His face is really covered a lot by his beard, and so you don't have to do a ton of this. There's some around the eyes and the mouth and the ears, and also you want to, of course, line between the fingers. And also, if you want, you can use this color to use a sort of a dividing line between the skin and the clothing or the jewelry if you want. But I found where I didn't do that, that still, you know, kind of came out, there was enough definition anyway, so that's not necessary, you know, that's not like strictly important if you don't want to do it. Now, because the sort of skin is a really important element of this model, I wanted to sort of add an intermediate highlight that I might not otherwise do with sort of more normal figures. So I added a little bit more Iraqi sand into the shade I was already working with, just to add sort of another subtle step up. And I'm just applying that here again and building it up on areas where I want there to be more highlights. You can see there's very, very little difference, especially once the paint starts to dry. So now I'm going to be applying a layer of just pure Iraqi sand to the model. And you can see that the highlight that this is adding is very subtle. It's a very small step from that layer I just did. And I think I really probably could have omitted that other layer, in fact, and you wouldn't have seen a whole lot of difference. So maybe something to keep in mind. And you can see we are getting some nice contrast in the skin, but it's all very subtle, very, very gradual transitions. And that's something that you probably have to worry about more when you're painting an area with a lot of skin. When you're just doing a face or hands, it's much easier to maintain that high contrast. But with this, if you paint everything too high contrast, you're going to end up having it look too stark and unnatural. But on the other hand, if you go too subtle, it can look flat, and that's a little bit what's happening here. Now, there are ways you can deal with that issue, and I'm using one of them here. What I've done is taken that glaze medium that I mentioned in the beginning, and I've taken a little bit of that Vallejo flat red, and I really mean a little. I really just dipped my brush a tiny bit in the red and put it into a much larger amount of glaze medium. Really a dab will do you here. You really got to keep this weak when you're working with a bright red. And so what I'm going to go do here is I'm going to start building up very, very thin transparent layers of this red glaze on the skin. A lot of it on the face. You can really build up layers there. But you can see I'm applying it around sort of the shadows of the musculature as well, which really helps add extra sort of dimension and interest to the overall skin tone. And for best results, using a glaze shouldn't be just a one-step thing. You're done. I applied that red glaze, and now I'm going back in with another skin highlight, which I made by mixing my Iraqi sand with a little bit of Vallejo ivory, and I'm now going ahead and applying this higher highlight. I'm doing it pretty thinly here, and I'm going over a lot of those areas that I actually glazed red, and so that helps tone down the red, because in most places you're not going to want it to be too starkly red. So this way it'll stay slightly pink, and that red's still going to kind of show through a little bit if you keep your paint transparent. But the whole effect is going to be more natural. The red is going to look more like it's under the skin or in the skin, which is how we look. We actually have a lot of red in our skin, and it's pretty kind of uneven and blotchy. So we have some areas that are redder and other areas that are less red, you know, if you look. And so this really is a great way to sort of simulate more real skin. And you can see I'm just using this really bright highlight to really sort of kind of really finely define bright highlights in the skin. At this point, you're really going to start seeing that contrast that we were missing just sort of a layer ago, and the whole model is starting to just come together very nicely. Once I applied that highlight, I went back in again with my red glaze again and brightened some areas, like especially the face, like the ears and the nose and the cheeks, just because those areas tend to get more red. But also on a dwarf, you kind of expect them to have sort of a really ruddy red inflamed complexion, so you can go a little bit over the top on a figure like this. I'm also now using some just pure ivory, real thin, very, very thin. That's the key word here, to add even more sort of really bright highlights to sort of the tops of the muscles and stuff. I'm pretty satisfied with the skin right now, so I'm going to move on to the pants. I'm going to be base coating these here with a mixture of black and Vallejo dark Prussian blue to start off with. I'm going to immediately start highlighting the pants. I'm first going to go over them just with pure dark Prussian blue, but you're not going to see a huge difference after that. And then I'm going to start lightening the dark Prussian blue using Vallejo blue gray here. At first, not very much. I want to keep my blue dark, so I'm not cutting it too very much. And the way this figure's posed, you've got really lots of nice sort of deep shadow areas, so it makes it really easy to sort of figure out where you need to put highlights and, you know, where to leave really, really dark. I am running into a bit of the problem I often have with these dark blues, which they dry really, really shiny and are a little bit difficult to see. And that's going to start getting better later, though, luckily, because the blue-gray tends to help matte down the dark Prussian blue because it's not quite such a sort of glossy color. Because I feel like there really needs to be more sort of interest and detail in this model, I decided to paint some stripes on his pants, and I'm going to be just doing that in a different shade of blue. I'm making the stripes a lighter shade, and I'm base coating those areas right now using just the pure Vallejo blue-gray as my base color. Highlighting the blue-gray is pretty straightforward. All I did was just start mixing in a little bit of ivory and then just do several layers of that. That is, I mean, I made several layers where I added in successively larger amounts of ivory to my mix to get those bright stripes highlighted. You can go for a higher or lower contrast look here. It's really what you like. But I like these pants because I feel like it gives it a little bit of sort of a Celtic vibe, which I think fits very nice with this whole dragon slayer, troll slayer kind of berserker vibe that this guy's got going on anyway. You could do this in another color combination too, and it'd probably look just as good. If you feel like there's not enough definition between the stripes when you're done, you can also go back in with a very, very dark blue and fine line along the edges of your light stripes, and that'll really kind of help sharpen the edges and tidy things up a little bit. Now I'm going to be working on his hair, which is obviously a big, big part of these models. I'm base coating here using Vallejo Saddle Brown. Now I realize if you're sticking to Canon or whatever, it doesn't even exist anymore because these guys are not even supported by Games Workshop, but whatever. I mean, it used to be that these guys were supposed to have like flaming orange hair. I know that, but because I feel like these guys aren't officially supported anymore, I feel like I can kind of do what I want with them and kind of go my own direction. So that's what I'm going for here. I'm going for a more sort of naturalistic look a little bit, and you know, also a color that I think is going to work a little bit better with the skin tones that I've kind of started building up. Once the base is dry, I'm going to apply a really nice heavy wash here of Carborg Crimson, which is from Citadel. You can see that gives the whole thing a little bit more of a red look, but it's kind of a slightly less natural color, I guess. But I think it's a cool color. But we're gonna start out with that. I'm now going to start highlighting the hair, and I'm making highlights here by mixing at first the brown sand into my saddle brown, which will take away a little bit of the redness, but that's okay. We're working over a pretty dark red-brown base now, and sort of you're going to get some transparency, which means that sort of redness is still going to come through. I'm really going to sort of focus on picking out individual strands and sort of areas of hair as much as I can. The sculpting varies here in the hair, so some places it's much more well-defined, and then you can really just really clearly pick those strands out. In other places it's less so, and then it's better to just sort of focus on the hair as a whole unit. think of areas where you think light would hit the hair, where you'd get kind of a shininess developing, and sort of start building up the lighter colors on those areas as best as you can. And you can see with this first layer, I'm really going to kind of be pretty generous with where I apply the color. And I'm not going to worry too much if I go over some of the sort of the sculpted recesses in the hair. That's all pretty easy to fix later on. And then I'm just going to continue highlighting. At first I just add more of the brown sand in and continue building up highlights on the hair where I think they need to be. And just, again, I'm generally concerned about tones here, but not necessarily picking out every individual strand, just making sure that the areas of the hair where I generally want there to be light hitting are the right shade, and that those areas sort of that are going to be in deep shadow stay in deep shadow. Especially with that mohawk, you can see I'm really building up the light colors along the top of it and kind of working down. And as far as this beard is concerned, you can see I tend to try to highlight or make the middle of those beard sort of areas lighter, because you expect that's to be where the shine is. Once you've applied several highlights, then it's a good time to go back over with your wash color and sort of carefully apply it. I'm being more selective this time. I'm applying it lighter. You can see I'm focusing it again more in the shadows and more lightly in the highlighted areas, though I am still going to apply it to the highlighted areas because it's important to help unify everything, and also because it'll bring out any sort of sculpted recesses that might have gotten destroyed while you were highlighting. And then I'm just going to continue back with the color I just used, again lightening up some areas that I feel like maybe got too much of the wash on them. But I'm starting to be really, from this point on, much more careful about applying highlight colors so that I don't kind of go over recesses too much. And I am using a number 0 brush here because when you're working with things like the hair, it's just a whole bunch easier to control what you're doing. My final highlight on the hair is just the same thing I was using, but instead of continuing to add in the brown sand, because that will just make it get too brown after a while, I've now started lightening it with some ivory. You don't want too much of this in here, but that sort of light, kind of more pastel, whitey ivory tone is good for putting high highlights on hair, because it's easier to make the hair look shiny with those kinds of tones, which is what we want to start happening here. We really want to get the real shiny parts of the hair here. Depending on how subtle you want to be, you can go with just one layer here, or you can lighten it several times with the ivory. And there's some areas where you really want it to look like there's really, really shiny hair, where you may want to go with not quite pure ivory, but a very pale color. But and doing that is really nice. You'll see that's, like, for example, really relevant on the braids or any area where the hair is very pulled tight and very compacted. You really want to especially be thinking about doing that. And it really will help finish the model and make the hair look really good. But it's something you have to be very careful not to overdo. You really have to do it in moderation, because otherwise models just start to look gray-haired, and that's not what you want. And of course, with all things hair, if you make a mistake, if it gets too light, if you feel like it's going the wrong direction, you can always still grab your wash and go back in to help unify everything. And you probably want to do that at the end anyway. It's just the further along you are in the highlighting process, the more careful you really need to be about where you apply the wash and how much wash you apply, because you want to keep things unified. You don't want it to maybe get too light everywhere, but at the same time you don't necessarily want to destroy all that work that you've kind of just done. Next, I'm going to be base coating his boots here, and I'm going to be just using Vallejo German Camouflage Black Brown for that purpose. I'm then going to go ahead and grab some chocolate brown, again from Vallejo, and I'm going to use that as the base coat on the axe shaft. but also as my first highlight on my boots. Nothing complicated here, just, don't make a mess, and, especially in the boots, don't worry if you feel like you're applying too much of it. This is just really sort of the rough first layer. Next, I'm just going to highlight the boots using my standard technique, and that is I'm taking the chocolate brown and I'm going to lighten it, in this case with the brown sand because it's what I have on hand. My first my next highlight on the boots here, you can see it's a fairly subtle step. I haven't added in too much brown sand so it's gradual here. And then, all you have to do is just kind of do this to taste. Keep adding in more layers of the lightening color and building it up, and especially focusing on areas of wear. I personally got a little bit carried away, and I spent quite a bit of time trying to just actually end up evening out the whole shade a lot more, because I felt like the contrast got too high between the light brown and the dark brown at some point. So then I just made the overall tone of the boots a lot lighter to compensate, and that's fine. Leather and boots and something like this, and especially in such a small, unimportant area, it's not going to be a huge deal, if, it's a little bit different looking. Just keep working on it until you've got sort of a combination that you find to be pleasant. I then really quickly highlighted the axe shaft. I didn't want to get complicated here, and I didn't want to have to get more shades of brown, which might have been actually the more interesting thing to do. But like I said, I didn't want to mess with even more colors. So what I did here was I used the chocolate brown again, and I just started lightening it using the Iraqi sand. And the effect of that is you very quickly get a very sort of pale, sort of pastel kind of gray-brown color. And that's the main point for me here, is mostly I get a look that is somewhat different from the boots in tone, but again, this is not something where I'm really concerned about it, and it's such a small area that I don't feel the need to spend a lot of time on it. Some of these things, of course, it's going to depend on what you're going to be doing with the figure, how much effort you want to put into, developing, really distinct colors in different areas and that kind of thing. But in this case, I don't think it's all that important to worry about. Now this is a fun part because we get to paint the gold on this figure, and it's a dwarf, he has a lot of jewelry, it's really blingy, and it really starts to pull the model together. I'm just base coating all of the sort of jewelry, the rings, the bracelets, the belt, and some accents on the axe here using a mixture of the Vallejo German camouflage black, brown, and the Army Painter greedy gold. Obviously the base should be mostly the darker shade, but with enough greedy gold in there to make it nice and metallic. Once that base is on there, then I'm just going to go back in with the pure greedy gold and start brightening it up, applying highlights. None of these areas of gold are very big, so it shouldn't be that difficult. You may find it's easier to use a number 0 brush for some of this if you've got detail in your gold jewelry, just because it'll make it easier to pick out the sort of the sculpting and relief work. I then went in with a light wash of Reikland Flesh Shade on the gold areas just to add a little bit more depth. I then went ahead and painted an extra bright highlight on the gold to make it real blingy by mixing a bit of Vallejo Air Steel into my greedy gold, and I'm just very lightly and very thinly kind of going along the edges and kind of applying this wherever I want there to really be kind of an extra shine happening. I'm then going to start base coating the rest of the axe blade. I used a mixture of black and the Vallejo Air Steel to do that, and then I just started highlighting up by mixing in a bit more of the Vallejo Air Steel and kind of going up from there. Ideally, you don't want to have too much of the pure Vallejo Steel everywhere. You should really try to reserve that for the sharp cutting blade part of the axe, and maybe just as some edge highlights and accents, because you really want to try to get some contrast in the metal. If you feel like there's not enough happening, which I did do at some point, what you can do is go in with a Nuln oil wash and just kind of apply that evenly over the whole surface, maybe even build it up in some areas that are not going to be as shiny, and then go back in with your steel afterwards and re-highlight up areas that you want that extra shine on. It is a good way. It's an old Games Workshop trick, in fact, but it is a good way when you're working with metal and you're feeling a little bit lazy, just to get some more tone and sort of variation in that metal without, you know, having to do a whole bunch of extra work. And I didn't want to do a really complicated sort of metal painting thing here, so I think that was a good idea. Alright, so here is the finished dwarf troll slayer / dragon slayer / you know, whatever it is officially, berserker, whatever you want to call it. Again, since these are sort of outdated figures, I don't think it really matters anymore. I'm quite pleased with how this model came out. I did have a lot of fun painting it, just like I knew I would. My favorite part really was working on the skin. Using that red glaze in your skin tone has been something I've been experimenting a lot with recently, and it really is a great, easy way to add more depth, character, interest to your skin. It's not very intimidating. It doesn't take very long, quite honestly, and it's relatively hard to mess up, actually. So I really recommend you give that technique a try if you're looking for a way to get your skin tone a little bit more interesting. Otherwise, there are things I think I probably could have spent more time on this model, done better. I think I could have put more time and effort into getting a good metal look on that axe. And, you know, hair, for example, that's always something you can do better. But I'll admit, especially with, like, the axe blade, I'm not usually a huge fan of painting metallic weapons. I just really don't like painting weapons. I don't think it's very fun. And often they're shaped in a way that makes it difficult to get the highlights looking good from every direction. So it's just not something I enjoy. And it, you know, this model was about having fun for me. So, you know, obviously I like spent more time on some things and less on others, but I think the overall effect is really nice. And it was just kind of a pleasant way for me to spend kind of my Sunday afternoon. So, you know, I hope you guys also enjoyed watching this and hopefully got something useful out of it. You can also see I've applied a matte varnish to the whole figure now that I'm done, and that's to counteract a lot of that shininess that was still in the blue pants and stuff like that, and just give the whole thing a more overall even looking tone. Now, if you enjoyed this video, of course, please like it, share it, leave me comments, and let me know what you thought. Do subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, and then you can keep up with the latest updates as well. And I think that is all for now, so I will see you next time.